Okay, I thought I'd do just a little review of the RCBS Primer Pocket Swager Tool version 2. As you can see, that's the version 2 here. What you're going to get in the package here is you're going to get the die, and there's a plunger in there which presses down on the bottom of the case to push the case down onto the swaging pin, which is right here. And you're going to get two of these in the package. You're going to get one for small rifle primers and one for large rifle primers. The other one's in here. It also comes with two pins, one for 223 5.56 and one for 7.62/308. So one's 30 caliber and one's 22 caliber. And then you have this little part right here. This is the thing that allows you to remove the case from the swager after you've pushed it all the way in there, because it's in there pretty solid. So the way this goes together is you got your ram right here, and you just slide this right on, just like a regular shell holder. Then obviously this goes, whoops, this goes right in here like this. And I've already got this adjusted. Took a little bit of trying to figure out exactly how deep to go, but pretty much you've got to go all the way in, because the swager, the sides of the swager are parallel, and then it's got a rounded edge here at the bottom, and that's what rounds out the crimp on military brass. So you really got to go all the way in. What I found out the hard way was that if you don't, well, you really don't remove the crimp very well, and then repriming the brass is a bit of a challenge. So when I had to go back and do a whole bunch of brass a second time, so don't do that. Adjust it down until it rolls the crimp off really good. Now this little part goes right over top of the ram right there, and as you can see when I raise the ram, the swager comes through, and then that rides on top of the ram. And then the idea is that when you get to the bottom of the stroke, you can actually then pull the swager out of the bottom of the case, because it's going to be in there pretty solid, and it's basically really hard to get the case off of there without that feature. Plus it allows the case to be pulled, or the swager to be pulled straight out of the bottom of the primer pocket, versus having to pry it off, which could cause the case to get rounded out. Now, another thing I found out too is that when you do this operation, now all these cases have been, they've all been resized, they've all been deprimed, and you can see, I don't know if you can see that there, this is Lake City. No, that's a Federal, that's a crimped Federal. I've got a whole bunch of Lake City brass here. I've already done a whole bunch. That's Lake City, and you can see the crimp, that little ring around the primer pocket there. That's the crimp they put on there. They just stamped that right in there, and that holds the primer in place. And that creates like a little lip, and if you try to reprime these with that lip right there, you will either not be successful, or you'll have all sorts of trouble with the possibility of actually setting off a primer, because you could crush the primer trying to put it in. It's a real pain in the ass. So that's the purpose of this operation, is to remove that crimp from military spec 5.56 brass, so that it can be reloaded without too much trouble. So then the other thing I found out too is that the natural inclination would be, okay, well, you put the case right on top of there and then try to run it in to the, into the pilot. The problem is that pilot is actually not much smaller than the sized mouth of the cartridge case. And it's designed to go into, the pilot's designed to go into the mouth once it's been resized. because they assume, I'm sure, that you resized and deprimed the brass in one operation. So what I found that the easiest way to do this is to actually put it up onto the pilot like so. You can't really see the pilot there, but it's up there, and you just gotta kind of feel for it, and you get used to it after a bit. And you just kind of slide it up there, and then you hold it in place with your finger. And I can see if I can do this here. I'm doing this, shooting this with my iPhone. But you're gonna hold it in place, and then you're gonna raise the RAM to the case. Now the case is going to naturally, of course, when you got two hands to do this, it's easier. Then it's going to kind of fall into the beveled portion on the top of the swager, and then that is going to push the case all the way in, and you're going to go to the bottom of the ram stroke, and then you're going to pull that out, and you can see that that case is very nearly all the way down onto the swager. And that swager's been pushed up in there far enough that that rounded edge on the bottom has rounded out the outer lip of the primer pocket, and thus rounded off that crimp. Now, you see why this is on there. This part here, this is actually really solid. It's on there pretty good. And if you try to just wiggle that off and pull it off, you're going to round out, or you're going to oval out your primer pocket. And that's really not good. So what you're going to do is, as you get to the bottom of the stroke, and it requires a little bit of force, and normally I would be holding on to it with one hand, but you're just going to kind of give it a little shot on the handle there to push the ram all the way down, and that pushes the case off of the swager. And as you can see, you see how it kind of rounded off that little lip. Now some of that lip is going to remain. You don't have to get it all, but it's really important if you can see that edge. It's really, really important that that turns into a nice rounded edge. And that's going to allow the next primer, when you seat it in there, to slide in there really nice and easy and seat properly without binding up or deforming. The other thing I found out too doing this is, when you do this operation, obviously when you resize, all this brass is going to be for an AR-15, so it's all been full length resized. So I've used case lube to lube the body and the necks of the cases to make the resizing process easier. But I found that when you have to swage these pockets, it is a much, much easier process if you also lubricate the primer pockets. So I use the same lube. I've actually found this stuff to be really good. I've used Imperial Sizing dye lube as well, and it works pretty well, but the problem is you got to apply it basically by hand to every single case, which is kind of a pain in the ass. It takes a lot of time when you're doing a lot of, brass like I am, a couple hundred at a time. This stuff works really, really well. I line all my cases up on a towel here, a spare, towel that's just a bath towel that's been, had gotten worn out, and I just cut it up for shop rags. And I just lay them out, and you can just spray this stuff right on the brass, and you just give it a good shot, and then you just kind of roll the brass 180 degrees, give it another shot. Works great. Same thing with the primer pockets. Spray it down, 180 degrees, spray it down. Then the secret with this stuff is it's got this, it's called this Dynaglide Plus. It's kind of like a wax, really. And the key is, don't go and start sizing or swaging right away after you use this stuff. Spray it on and give it like 3, 4, 5 minutes to dry. What's going to happen is the solvent in there is going to dry, and it's going to leave like a wax, a very, very thin wax lubricant layer on the brass, and it works phenomenally. If you use it right away, before it has a chance to set up, it really doesn't work very well. And so if you use it right away before it dries, you might think, well, God, this stuff sucks. The reality is you just need to let it set up. Once it's set up, this stuff is really, really good. It's every bit as good as the Imperial Sizing Dye lube. In fact, it's much faster and easier to apply because you don't have to really do it one at a time. And it's kind of hard to over apply this stuff. So I found I have less issue with over lubricated cases for resizing where I've gotten dimpled shoulders and whatnot. It happens almost never with this stuff versus Imperial Sizing Dye lubricant. If you overdo it just a slight bit, a little goes a long way, and if you overdo it just a little slight bit, you'll get dimples in the shoulders of your brass. So yeah, that's basically it. So you just go through and you do all your brass like that, and it's it sucks because it's a long and tedious operation, but it's a one-shot deal. Once you do this with your brass, you don't ever have to do it again. You remove that crimp and it's gone forever. You can reload it, 5, 6, 7 times, and you're good to go. So, but that's the RCBS Primer Pocket Swager Tool 2. It works really well. I really like it. I know there's others out there, but I chose this one because I wanted a press-based system, and I also wanted something that wasn't going to actually remove brass. This stuff just pushes the brass, it rolls the brass over, so it doesn't actually remove material. Because if you do that, you can use let me see if I can find mine here. But you can use the tool that you use to chamfer and deburr your cases after you trim them. It's in here somewhere, but I'm not going to be able to find it without searching for it. But anyway, you can use that if you want to, and it works. But obviously, it's a manual process, and you got to be really, really careful not to overdo it. Because if you overdo it, that piece of brass is basically toast. So the RCBS Primer Pocket Swager Tool, unless you really get carried away and really ram that in there too deep, you really can't do it wrong unless you go too shallow. But I've also found that adjusting this thing, you really get to a point where you can't, if you keep turning this down, where you turn that pilot slash plunger down too far, to where it's pushing the swager in too much, you won't be able to get the press to, in the case of an RCBS, which cams over, you won't even be able to get it to cam over. I mean, it's basically, it just stops. So you really I don't think you're really going to be able to go too deep unless you put just a whole bunch of effort onto it. And if you're doing that, obviously you're doing it wrong. It takes a little bit of effort to cam the press over, but it's not that much. But make sure you're getting it deep enough, because otherwise you're going to have to go back and redo it again, or you're going to have a real pain repriming the brass. So I just wanted to share that because that was my experience with it. You live and learn. Maybe I can share a little bit of knowledge so that people don't have to go through the experimental process that I went through in order to be able to do this right the first time and save yourself some time and effort. So, okay, that's all I've got.